Good morning. I'm not John Barrow, and for that y'all might be missing him in a little while. If we could, let's go ahead and start the class and go ahead and get settled in. We'll start with prayer in just a second. All right, if you would, join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to be here and to worship you, Lord. We pray that you will continue to be with us, be with our families, be with this congregation. And Lord, be with us all in this class this morning. Hope we get something that we can take away from it and learn and be helpful to other friends and family when they go through rough times. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. This is also not going to be about Genesis. I understand y'all been in a series about Genesis, and when I asked John, what are y'all doing? He said, well, we're doing Genesis, but you just do whatever you want. So we're going to do something that's quite different from Genesis, but I'm Brian Brinyark. I don't know many of you in here. I've been going here for quite a while. I still haven't gotten around to meeting everybody. Some of you probably know my parents, Betty and Bruce Brinyark. They used to go to University Church. I grew up at the University Church and went there till my adult life, and then they are now at Central Church. And anyway, but I'm an attorney, and I primarily practice in the area of domestic relations or family law. And we all know that God hates divorce. We know that from Malachi 2:16. But I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to talk with y'all today about ways that you might be able to help friends or family members that find themselves going through a divorce, or they're facing the thought of going through a divorce. And as a divorce lawyer, I'm starting my 30th year next month. And you might think, well, that's an odd thing to do. Nobody ever sets out to be a divorce lawyer. But I find myself being in a position to help people more than I can help them in any other area of the law. I've done all kinds, and when somebody goes through this kind of a thing, you're catching them at their lowest point in their life usually, and you're encouraging them, you're telling them it's going to be all right. You know, they're going to make it, they're going to be okay on the other side. And it's very encouraging to see them after everything's over, maybe a year or two later, and they actually are doing well, and everything is good in their life, and they appreciate you helping get them through. But anyway, like I said, in Malachi 2:16, God tells us that he hates divorce. Yet in 2021, the stats in America show that the divorce rate is still 45%. So this is something that is, if it hasn't happened in your life, if it hasn't happened in your family or your friends, you're very unusual because it's so prevalent. The divorce rate for second marriages is even higher than that. It's at 60%. And Alabama ranks 10th in the country for having the highest number of divorces. So odds are we're all going to have family or friends that are going to go through something like this. So the title of my little talk today is First Aid for Divorce. And when you just like in medical situations, you have to do certain things to kind of take care of people and assess how they are. The first thing you want to do is check for vitals, right? If it's a first aid situation, you're going to check, make sure they've got a pulse and all that. Well, here you want to find out, if you hear somebody talking about it, you want to check and see, where are they in this? Have they gone to counseling? This isn't something to take lightly. This isn't something that they want to just jump into. Divorces can happen kind of quick if they don't watch it. So you want to take them and encourage them to take a deep breath, step back, assess the situation. You want to check and see if there's a heartbeat for this relationship at all. Is there still anything where there's something that's still there that can be saved? People sometimes say they're just done. Well, that's not an excuse. You can't just be done. Marriage is work. You got to work through that. And sometimes people give up too early, so you got to encourage them, encourage your family members or friends to take their time, ease back, talk to them about the good days. There was something there that made them want to be married to start with. So there ought to be something that they still have that can be saved. So encourage them to get with counselors. Encourage them. I always ask, where do you go to church? To me, if you can get them to somebody in their church, that if they're both spiritual people, Christians, if you get them to church, there's a bedrock there. There's if you can get it down to the Bible, if they believe in the Bible, well, then there's hope that they can get with the preacher or get with somebody at their church and get back to the basics and work it back up. This is what a husband's supposed to be. This is what a wife's supposed to be. This is what a marriage is supposed to be. So encourage them to get with somebody that can help them, and not just somebody that's going to, give them a few things and give them some advice. But if they have that common belief, then they have the groundwork there that they can build up from. So once they're in it, though, you want to stabilize them, right? Going back to the first aid, you check for vitals, then stabilize. Well, in divorce situations, stabilizing can be really interesting. Having done these things for quite a while, you want to make sure they're not suicidal. These are all things that I've had in cases. I've had people that have actually committed suicide. You got to make sure they're not homicidal. I've had people that have tried to kill the other side. In one case, while the lady was sleeping, the guy snuck up to the house and threw a Molotov cocktail on the porch and caught the house on fire while she was there. And then he was waiting outside the back door where he thought she would run out with a gun. And she had enough sense to realize what was going on. She called the cops, and she wouldn't run out of the house until they got there, and the fire trucks and everything. It's crazy. So you want to make sure that you talk them out of doing anything like that. You want to make sure they're not planning on kidnapping the kids. That's another thing that comes up from time to time. They just go and grab the kids and take off. And, well, that's not smart. Talk them out of doing that. That's not going to help anything. That actually, leads to very bad things for them. So if you got one of your friends that's talking about doing that, that's a no-no. They don't need to throw their spouse's things in the street. They don't need to just put them out in the weather. That happens also. That's a big one. You don't want them to cause physical injury to the girlfriend or boyfriend, whoever they might be running around with. That happens a lot. Had a case where a lady went to find her husband, and she found her husband with a paramour, and she just happened to have a big D-cell mag light, and she couldn't resist. She just had to start beating the woman with the mag light. So she's a lady that was the president of the PTO, and she's so sweet, and she's all that. But when people are faced with that situation, you never know what they're going to do. So make sure that you make sure that your friends or whoever's going through this, talk them out of things like that. Talk them through things. Make sure they don't do anything like that. You don't want them to do anything like a client of mine did, where she drove her Porsche through the garage door into the Porsche that was his Porsche and rammed it all the way into the house, and then got out and took his custom motorcycle, knocked it over onto the Porsche and broke it up. Then she found a bunch of drugs, and she littered them all over the scene. And then she went and she put mace on his leather recliner that he always liked to sit on and sleep in. And it just kind of melted everything. And then she took a knife and stuck a note to it and said, "What are you going to do now? Call the police?" So he didn't. He had illegal drugs everywhere. So, people do crazy stuff, and these are real things. You don't want them. A big thing, apparently, because this happens all the time, they gather the spouse's things together that they're supposed to give them after the case is over with, and they urinate on it. Don't let them do that. That happens a lot. I don't know what it is about people wanting to do that to their ex-spouse's things, but that's not a good thing. All right, so we've checked for vitals to see if there's any way of saving it. Then we're going to stabilize. We're going to talk them out of doing the stupid stuff, talk them out of doing anything rash. Then we're going to immobilize. And what I mean by that is, typically, if somebody's going through a divorce, our judges expect them to stay in the same house together. They don't need to move out. The judges can't kick them out unless there is a threat of danger or there's actually been physical violence, because you can't kick somebody out of their property, out of their house, unless there is a hearing, a final hearing, because that's just due process. You've got to give them a chance, and you can't go kicking people out. So they don't need to move out. They don't need to kick the other one out. And another thing that judges see is that if they stay together, cases settle a lot faster than when they're together than when they're apart. The case will get over faster because that uncomfortable feeling when, that person comes home, you just feel that sick in your gut. And when that happens, you're more likely to, you're very uncomfortable. You want to get the thing over with. When you separate, you see that people get more comfortable and they're more willing to keep the thing going on longer because they're more comfortable. So immobilize them, don't let them move out. Also, they don't need to take the kids and move. We've got a Relocation Act in Alabama that says that you can't move more than 60 miles without permission from the ex or from the court. So, if they're talking about taking the kids and moving off or moving back home or whatever, that's not a good thing either. So you can go ahead and be telling them that that's something they don't need to consider, they don't need to think about. Also, when people separate, it creates monetary problems. It creates financial problems because they're having to support two different locations. They still have the expenses from the house. Now they've got these new expenses of a new apartment or whatever, so that's not a good idea. So if you have a friend or family member going through this, make sure you talk them out of doing anything that involves moving. All right, another thing that you want to do is get them to a professional as soon as possible. By that I mean you want to get them to the right attorney. You want to get them, sometimes people need they need private investigators. They might need appraisers. There are things that they're going to need to help them with their attorney in the case. Sometimes you even need to get things like a professional taxidermist. I had a case one time where they had so much taxidermy that it was well over $100,000 worth of animals, stuffed animals on the wall, and we had to get an expert. Well, you start wondering who would be an expert for that. So I called the University of Alabama and talked to them at their Museum of Natural History and asked them who they had that would value their animals that they have in the museum. And there's a guy out of Georgia that they hire that's an expert, and he does that for all insurance. And anyway, I had to get him. So there's all kinds of people that they might end up needing to get. And that's another thing that you've got to sometimes help your friends or family members with, is this can get expensive, right? This can be something that goes on for a while. It's something that involves several different people. And they might need a loan from you. They might need some help financially from their family. It's very often the case that when they go through this, money is an issue. Money is always an issue. And a lot of times in divorce, money is a big issue right up front. And so they might be looking to family or to friends for a little help when they're going through that, because there's all kinds of things that they have to do as it goes through. So when they get in a case, you're going to do discovery, and they're going to go through things where they sometimes have to do depositions. Sometimes you got to do a lot of depositions. And that just takes a lot of money, it takes up a lot of time, and it may be something that y'all need to help out with. Counselors. This is another thing, even after the case gets going, make sure they know that just because somebody filed, say they don't want the divorce and the other spouse filed, it's never too late to back off. You can always put the case on hold. You can always take a step back. They can always get back with counselors and start the process. People that try to put it back together and they don't use somebody that is a professional rarely are able to do anything good with that. What I see is if they get with a good counselor, especially if they get with a Christian counselor, then there's hope of being able to put that back together. And that's really what you want them to do. Sometimes people think as soon as it's filed, it's over. There's no hope for taking that step back. But the judges love for it to be stalled. They love to put it on an administrative docket. They want people to be able to save their marriage and for the case to go away. Of course, that gets it off their docket, and that saves them a lot of time and a lot of effort that they don't want to have to do. So, encourage them, even when things have already started. Tell them it's not over. It's still time. They can still put this thing back together. and that's what they need to try to do. All right. Another thing that you do with first aid, if there's an injury, after you've checked for vitals and after you've immobilized and after you've gotten them to professional, sometimes you need to apply pressure. Now, this is when the case is going, and they haven't been able to put it back together, and it appears that they're going to have to go all the way with this. Pressure comes from facts. Facts can sometimes be about the girlfriend or boyfriend, facts about financial matters that have been cheated about or lied to the IRS or whatever. So when you're talking with your friends or family and they're talking about their case, you need to ask them questions. Well, have you looked into this? Have you looked into that? Because if you find the right thing, then you can apply some pressure to the other side and make them want to get the case over with and settle in a way that you want, not the way that they were wanting to go. So I told you this is a lot different than Genesis, right? This is very different from Genesis. This is more real life today. And if you haven't faced it, or your friends haven't faced it, or your family hasn't faced it, you're very, very rare. This is something that does impact the church. And it is something that we need to think about. And it's something we need to be ready to help with when somebody is going through it. And they will go through it. Somebody's going to go through it that you know it probably already has. When you are looking for things that can cause the other one to be another pressure point, sometimes their pride, the other person's pride is the thing that can be pushed on. When somebody's very prideful and they think they're just all that in the community, the fact that they might be exposed as having done something improper can really be a motivator for people to back off and to try to get the case resolved. Sometimes the embarrassment from that, especially if there's some kind of hard proof, some kind of video or something like that, really makes people back up, really makes people back away. And if your friend or family member that's going through this has to be going through it, they want it over with sooner than later. They don't want to have to go through a full-fledged divorce. They don't want to have to go through all the discovery and trial and all that. Money is another thing that can cause people to have to back off. They can sometimes lack of money. They don't have time to stay in the fight. They don't have enough money to keep going with it, and they have to go ahead and just take whatever's offered them. Sometimes that's the other side's whole plan, is to just outspend them, get them in a position where they've got to want it over with so badly that they cave and they go ahead and take whatever offers out there. So again, if you need to help your family member with some money and try to get it back from them later, that's a good thing to try to help them because this can sometimes be over in a bad way for them just because they didn't have the money to stay in the case. Fear. Fear is another thing that is very powerful and puts pressure on people. If they're afraid of the process, if they're afraid of going to court, if they're afraid of being exposed, that fear is something that motivates everybody, right? I mean, fear is something that everybody feels. And if your friend that's going through it or your family member that's going through it, if they have some knowledge of what the other person is very afraid of, if they're very afraid of money issues and losing their money, if they're very afraid of being exposed, whatever their fear is, it's very important to put pressure on that. Cases can take a long time. Most cases, if you file today, are going to take at least a year before they can be in front of a judge. So we're talking, a whole year of emotional distress, emotional turmoil. Kids, a lot of times, being in the middle of that, in that pressure cooker that exists. And, anything you can do during the case to try to shorten that helps them a lot. But time is something that helps people work through the grief. They say that going through a divorce is very much like having a death of a close loved one. Well, what I see is that it's worse than that, because death is a natural thing. Everybody knows that everybody's going to die at some point. That's natural. And it's expected. It'll make you sad when it happens, but it's not something that's out of the blue. It's not something that's that's intentional. So people, as they work through the same stages of grief that they have to work through with death, in a divorce, that person's not gone. That person is actively fighting them for the things that are most important to them, their money, their kids, their possessions. And so what I tell people is, get ready. It is worse than death because it takes, a while to get through, and this person is constantly coming at you. They're not gone. So people take a lot longer to get to acceptance in the grief stages than it does from an actual death. So divorce is an unnatural thing. No one gets married expecting to get divorced, right? So when you have that happen, it's very hurtful. It's not what was planned, and it's an unnatural end to something. So it's very difficult for that person that's going through it. So be ready to step in and help take care of them and talk them through as they go. All right. Also, if it's a first aid kind of thing or in a medical thing, after we've checked for vitals and we've immobilized and we've stabilized, sometimes they have to do surgery, right? Well, surgery in the divorce context would actually be the end result, which would either be a mediation or a trial. Now, in mediation, that's where we are now in most cases. Starting about maybe 10 years ago, Alabama became a mandatory mediation state where every case has to mediate before you go to trial if either party asks for it or the judge can order it on their own. And our judges just, as a matter of course, order it on their own. You can't have a trial unless you've already mediated the case. And mediation is very successful. I'm a mediator. I do quite a few of those, but I'd say about 90% of cases actually mediate successfully and get done there. What a mediation is you have the parties come in, they're with their lawyers, and they're in two different rooms. They don't see each other that day. The mediator goes back and forth trying to help them customize a settlement for their case. And that is definitely a lot less emotionally draining. It's a lot better for everybody involved if they can get that done. And they can customize visitation schedules. They can customize exactly the way they want the property to go, or get creative and think of new ways to have things done that just match up with their family habits and rituals, or they're exactly the way they want their property to be divided. A judge doesn't do that, because when a judge hears it, they've seen that case in front of them 1,000 times, but just with different faces on it. It's either a long-term marriage or a short-term marriage. It's either got kids or it doesn't, and they just pound square pegs into round holes. They don't give it a whole lot of new thought. They have a way they're going to handle it, and they're going to handle it that way every time. So, if they do go to mediation, like they will, there's a big chance they're going to get it resolved that way, and it cuts the time way off the case. It cuts a lot of expense off the case. So, if you have someone that that's going through it, go ahead and mention early on to them. I'm sure their lawyer will, but mention, hey, you may not have to go to trial with this. You can go to mediation. You've heard about mediation, and that's a better way of doing it. And that's something that will be helpful to them, and they'll remember that. If mediation doesn't work, then you do have to go in front of the judge. And if you go in front of the judge, you really need to be ready. You got to have your witnesses lined up. You're going to have people that, you may end up as a family member being a witness in the case. If you've observed them with their kids and you've seen them be a parent and how they parent and whether they are a good disciplinarian or whether they, do whatever, because every case involving custody is going to have usually, of course, the parties are going to testify. Then you're going to have somebody that's some family member, maybe the grandmother or granddaddy of the child. And then you're going to have sometimes people from the church come in and talk about what they see when they see that person parenting. A lot of times we'll try to get a school teacher. School teachers don't want to be there in court. They don't have a dog in the fight, but they are very reliable in their testimony. They're very unbiased. And so you try to get somebody, farther out, like a teacher. Any family member is going to be very biased, and so the judge is going to see it as that way, and anything they say is probably going to be very favorable for that person. And so it's good to know what your position is and your role is if you're called in. Of course, it's to tell the truth and do what you've got to do for that. If you have a family member that's going through this and they have a trial, that's not the end of it. After that trial order comes out, there's always going to be post-judgment motions filed where they say that it needs to be vacated. They need a new trial. The judge did something wrong, so they have 90 days that the judge can rule on that, and they have a hearing, and then after that, there's probably going to be an appeal. An appeal just to the Court of Civil Appeals is a 1.5-year process, so that's going to be more money. It's going to be more time that goes by. And then usually when you get that back, if somebody's still seriously upset about it and they haven't run out of money, then they appeal it to Supreme Court. So that's another year. So it's something that can really, really go a long time. And when we're talking about mediation before, that's something that is a big part of mediation, is talking to them about how long a process this could be. You know, you think you want your day in court. No, you don't. It's not going to be what you think it's going to be. You think you want that person exposed or that person, have to get up and testify and tell. Well, you hear more truth on the street than you do in the court sometimes. I'm convinced about that. People get in there and, unfortunately, I think they tell only what they think sounds good for them and what can't be proven wrong. If there's not a document that can show something different or a video, then they're going to say whatever's best for them sometimes, and that's very frustrating when you get in that situation, when you know that person's not telling the truth on the other side, and sometimes you just don't have a way to disprove it. So make sure that you do the best that you can to talk those people out of going all the way to the point of trial, because that's not great. All right. Talked about the stages of grief and talked about helping somebody get through that. Anytime that you can jump in and get with that person and really talk to them and get them to start sharing with you what's going on with them, because there's all kinds of things that are going to be racing through their head. There's all kinds of things that they're going to be wanting to do or thinking about doing that they don't need to do. If you can jump in, even if it's before, great. Talk them out of it if you can. If it's during, try to get them to talk with you and share what's going on with them, because even the best people have bad thoughts when they go through this. They have thoughts of doing bad things to the other side. They have thoughts of doing bad things in the case that they think would help them, and it's just not what they need to do. And if you can get with them and start talking to them and make sure that they're sharing with you the truth, they'll be much, much better off. If they go through that, and after the case is totally over, you're going to see a couple of different things. Usually, you see them with the kids. There's a thing called parental alienation. And after the case is over with, sometimes the parents just don't stop talking about the other party. They don't stop talking about their dad. They don't stop talking about their mom. And that continued talk about the other, and out of the anger that they have, parental alienation is actually something where one parent is trying to drive a wedge in between the relationship between the child and the other parent. And it's called alienating them from the parent. And when that starts happening, if you see your family member doing that, or if you see your friend doing that, discourage that, because that's not something that's going to be helpful for them. It's not going to be helpful for the co-parenting that they need to do going forward. And it's not helpful for the kids constantly having upset between the two parents, and it makes them uncomfortable. Divorce is something that's long-lasting, of course. It's after the kids are grown. You're going to have weddings and funerals and graduations and other events that these two parents are going to have to continue to go to. And the kids can still have a lot of anxiety about how the parents are going to act when they get there. So the sooner they can kind of get over themselves, and the sooner they can kind of get to where they can be in the same room with the other party and everybody get along, the kids are much more benefited from that. They benefit a lot more from that if they can get them to that point. So encourage your friends, encourage your family members to not do those things that are kind of parental alienation. After a case is over, after the divorce, it usually takes people about a year to start forming new traditions. You have every holiday is different. Whatever you used to do with the kids and with your family is now different. You've got odd and even schedules with visitation. You've got things that suddenly your extended family always gets together on Thanksgiving Day for lunch. Well, suddenly you've got this situation where your divorced friend or family member is not able to bring the kids at that time, and they might try to say, hey, can we do Thanksgiving dinner this time so that we can be there instead of doing lunch. And if you're the one that's hosting that kind of a thing, try to be flexible because that's really helpful. They can't control when they get to have the kids. They can't control their schedule anymore because it's set in paper, set in writing when they are able to have the kids and all that. So if you have the ability to move things around, it really helps the person that's been through this because they really hate being the odd person out that either doesn't get to come to the family function anymore or they don't get to, or they come by themselves and everybody's asking, well, where are the kids? Where are the kids? Well, that's another reminder of the divorce. That's another talk about everything. So if you're the one that's hosting, try to be flexible for them. That would really help. And like I said, it takes them about a year to go through. Every new holiday, every time they go through it, they've got to create new traditions. Encourage them, if it's your friend that's going through it, encourage them to do something totally different. Don't try to recreate what used to be. Try to create have them try to create a whole new way of celebrating that holiday or whatever. Now, after the case is over, some people think, well, fine, it's finally over with, they're done, they're never going to have to go through it again. Well, that's rarely the case if there were kids involved because there's anything involving custody, child support, or alimony, if they have alimony, is modifiable. So those things come back up again and again where you have to modify things. If somebody's income goes way up, it's going to be modified. If somebody loses a job, child support and alimony can be modified. So that's something you may see your friend going through again, and you may think, what are they doing in court again? That shouldn't be something they're having to mess with anymore. But those things never go away, and quite often they come back up as modifications, and they have to do that. Also, there's contempt of court that happens after the fact. If somebody doesn't follow the order, you might see your friend or family member going through it again because the other side is refusing to follow the order. They haven't paid the medical expenses of the child that they were supposed to do, or they haven't paid alimony like they were supposed to, or child support the way they were supposed to. So those are things that can make your friend or family member get drawn back into the court system again and have to go through it again. And again, this time when they go through it, they're going to be a lot more emotionally stable when they go through it because they've already been through the big one. But it's just another nuisance. It's another thing that you'll see them having trouble with. So be there for them, and again, try to help them in every way that you can, and understand that it may not be that they just want to go back, it's that they got to go back. So don't think bad of them for having to go back to court again to enforce the order or to modify something. Don't think they just love the process so much that they're having to do it again and again and again out of want. It's out of need for a lot of them. I don't really know if there's anybody in here that's been through this personally. I don't know y'all's situation. I don't know if y'all have children that have gone through it or like I said, siblings or a family member that has gone through it. But it is something that we as a church really do need to be prepared to meet them in their time of need and help them in their time of need. We know that divorce isn't anything that we should want. It's something we should absolutely be against. and it's something we should absolutely try to help our friends and family members away from it and try to talk them out of it. But we need to be ready, when needed, to step up and help them in some of the ways that we've talked about this morning. So that's pretty much my talk. It wasn't Genesis. It's not y'all's series that y'all have been in. It's very unusual to come to church and hear somebody stand up in front of you and talk about the divorce process and how that goes. But it is so prevalent that I felt like it was something that could be shared and that y'all might get something out of, and it's something y'all might have something to take away from it that that can be helpful for your family or helpful for you with your friends. And anyway, since this is a class situation, if y'all have any questions that y'all want to ask, I'll be glad in the next few minutes to take questions about anything involving domestic relations or family law. If you have anything. Randy, you got any questions? No? Good. Anybody? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I can't hear thunder. Well, Alabama is, you hear some states, like California or whatever, they're community property states and things like that. Alabama is an equitable division state. There is no, once you're married, it's 50-50, everything's going to be split. It's what's fair under the circumstances. And the judges have the discretion to decide what's fair. Whatever the judge says is fair is fair. It is a very strange thing. It's the only area of law where the judges have that kind of power. There is no more powerful judge than a divorce judge, because they are the trier of fact and law. And even involving that, they don't have to do what the law says, because the law says you do whatever you think, judge, whatever you think is right. So it's really important to know that judge. It's important to know the judges that do it. We have two here in Tuscaloosa County that are dedicated to just doing divorce cases and family law. So you get, I'm in front of them all the time, so I kind of know what they do. And when a lawyer comes in from Birmingham or some other place, I love it, because they don't really know what the judge is going to do, and they don't know what to expect, and a lot of times we do better in those situations if we have to be in front of the judge. But when the judge has discretion to do whatever they want to do, that is your one and only audience. That's who you've got to impress or not to make mad. And sometimes in the process of going through the case, if your friend or family member that's going through it makes the judge mad and they've had to come to court before the final trial just to deal with something that they were doing, that judge isn't going to forget that, and that's going to affect the things that they end up with in the end, and then maybe their visitation schedule or whatever. So Alabama is a good state to be in as far as when you go through this, but it's really county by county, judge by judge is what you get. Here in Tuscaloosa, we have Judge Elizabeth Hamner, we have Judge Dennis Steverson. Dennis Steverson is an elder in the Vance Church of Christ, and he is extremely strict. He's extremely conservative. It is refreshing to have someone on the bench that actually cares about fault. Most of our judges they've just gotten numb to it, it seems. Every case that gets to them, somebody has cheated. So, when you're sitting there putting on evidence about the affair, it's just a check mark on a page. It's like, of course they did. Okay, what else you got? And you don't really see that reflected very much in the order itself, in the division. Now, we used to have a judge out of Sulligent that would come and visit and be a stand-in judge when we had too many cases, and it was before we got our second judge here in Tuscaloosa County. It was Judge Gosa. Judge Gosa, if he heard that there was an affair, 90-10 was a possibility. 90%, one person getting 90% of everything and the other person being left with 10% happened a lot with him. And that was kind of, if you heard you had Judge Gosa and you were the one that was on the cheating side, it got you real motivated to get the case over with quickly. So anyway, but that's pretty much the way we have it here. So anyway, thank y'all. Thank y'all for putting up with me today. Brother Bear will be back next week, and y'all will be back in Genesis, and y'all will be in good shape. Thank y'all.